You're listening to the Sonny Brown Breakdown. Now, it is time to break it down.
Welcome to episode number 53 of the Sonny Brown Breakdown. I'm your host, Sonny Brown, and in this episode I talk to Robert Degle, a noted no-gi leg lock specialist and black belt in Jiu-Jitsu who was recently banned from competing in the black belt division by the IBJJF due to not having spent enough time registered as a brown belt before being promoted. Yet we discuss why he thinks the organization has an overall net positive benefit and influence on the sport, from the prestige of its competition circuit to the rules and point system that he believes forces a well-rounded jiu-jitsu game regardless of gi or no-gi competitions. It's an interesting take on how an external sporting body or external organization can influence a sport and control individual competitors' actions. So we get into the in-depth of that, which I must say was a surprise to hear from Robert, but he makes a strong case for it, and I hope you enjoy the episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can purchase a Sonny Brown Breakdown shirt or hoodie or crewneck sweater from scuffle.com.au. It's scuffle.com.au. Or if you'd like to send any feedback, it's sunnybrown@gmail.com, or the Instagram is sunnybrownbreakdown. And if you do enjoy it, you can drop a 5-star review on any of your podcast platforms. Tell a friend too. Promoting podcasts is difficult, so if you'd like to share it around, it's always much appreciated. And without any further ado, let's go to the podcast. G'day, Robert. How are you today, mate?
Pretty good.
That's good. Coming to us from Austin, Texas, training down there at the B team now, and thought it'd be good to catch up. We had a little discussion previously just on the gi versus no gi debate, and you were quite adamant that you had a take that I wouldn't really expect you to be making.
Yeah.
Because if people follow you on Instagram, which I highly recommend, it would obviously have the impression that you're pretty staunchly no-gi centered and that you'd be a no-gi advocate. But as it turns out, you feel that there is that value in the gi that you think is perhaps being overlooked by some people. So what do you think is some of the, in that gi versus no-gi debate, what is it that really makes you think that there is still that merit in gi when you come across as a no-gi guy?
Yeah, I mean, I'll also add that, I've trained in the gi like once in the last couple of years. So I'm not practicing in the gi very consistently. So to make this argument, I want to connect. There's two different things that I think are important to bring together. The first is kind of like a history of modern competitive jiu-jitsu, just like a very brief one, and talking about sociological conditions which produce very good athletes. So I want to move away from this idea of we can look at systems producing great athletes, or we can look at individuals. And to some extent, both of these things are, of course, relevant. But I want to make the argument that systems are ultimately more important for producing great athletes. And I think that the gi has historically been part of a certain system and a certain culture of behavior, which has led to long-term competitive success by certain athletes, obviously originally from Brazil, but now from all over the world, but still mainly Brazil, actually. So yeah. So basically, let's start off with a brief, very, very brief history of modern competitive jiu-jitsu. So the IBJJF was really the first major jiu-jitsu competition to begin being organized, right? They started out as the CBJJO. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that in Portuguese. It would not sound good. In 1990, I want to say 1994. Yeah, by Carlos Gracie Jr. in Brazil. So Carlos Gracie Jr. was the son of Carlos Gracie Sr. And he did two things which went against the rest of the family. So Carlos Gracie Jr. was mainly trained by Holes Gracie. And Holes Gracie, unlike many other members of the family, he was actively competing in sports. So for instance, wrestling, sambo, I think maybe judo, though I'm not sure, but he definitely competed in wrestling and sambo. And he really valued the extent to which athletic competition pushed the development of his grappling. Okay. And I would assume that he taught that to Carlos Gracie Jr. Because he was heavily trained by him. So Carlos Gracie Jr. he did two things that the rest of the family kind of discouraged him from doing. He started Gracie Barra. So Gracie Barra was a Gracie affiliate academy in an area of Brazil. I forget the exact name, but it's like Baja something, right? So yeah, it's just based on the name of where he put it. And apparently that is not a super heavily populated area. It's actually more of a smaller area. And they were telling him this is not going to work out, blah, blah, blah. Lo and behold, it definitely did. And yeah, at least financially, right?
Definitely.
And then the second thing he did was he saw the value in having a consistent tournament. I would love to know more about his specific personal motivation for doing it. I have not ever found any interviews about anything like that. I'm just speculating on the connection between Holes Gracie's previous athletic, pursuits. I don't actually know, but yeah. But if anyone does know that or has info on that, please definitely send it to me. I'm super curious. But regardless, he started it in 1994. It was a pretty small organization at first. They were just running tournaments within Brazil, but then it started to pick up steam. And then the next thing you know, 1996, they had the first Mundials, the first IBJJ. Well, it wasn't the IBJJF yet. It was still the CBJJO, but it's the same organization.
But what became the IBJJF then, I guess?
Yeah, I mean the CBJJF is still active. They're just the Brazilian version of the IBJJF. I follow them on Instagram. I follow them and IBJJF on Instagram. Right? It's ultimately the same organization. And then obviously you have in 1998 ADCC starts, which is the first major no-gi competition. So you have gi competition starting in 1994, and you have no-gi competition starting in 1998. Now, when you look at the history of both of these sports, if you try to view them as isolated sports, it doesn't make sense. You're getting especially if you only look at no-gi. I think you could get away with only looking at gi. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. And you'll get a more complete picture. But if you look at gi and no-gi, you look at IBJJF and ADCC together, you start to see a better picture of what the competitors are actually doing. Because historically, nobody viewed these as separate sports. The guys who were doing one were also doing the other. So like, if you just pull up, for instance, the guys who are winning one, they're usually also winning the other. And that has tended to continue to this day, where there is only one there's really only one period, like no-gi guy who's ever won ADCC in the modern era. If we go back in time, you could argue, I'm not sure, like, did John Olof Einemo train in the gi? Did Mark Robinson train in the gi? Sanae Kikuta was like a catch wrestler, right? So like you could go back and there's random people you can pick here and there, right? But since I would say like the modern ADCC, since it really kind of became more popular in like 2003, 2005, it's been dominated by mainly Brazilians and people who train both gi and no gi, with the one obvious notable exception of Gordon Ryan. And you've had people who've medaled, Craig Jones, Lachlan Giles, Rustam Chasiev. These are people who've medaled, who are pure no-gi guys, but by and large, it's gi and no-gi guys medaling and especially winning. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now there's two ways we can account for that. We could just say, well, there's just more guys that do that. And there's definitely some truth to that. 100%. But I don't think it's just that, because there are still a lot of guys who are just doing no-gi. I'll give you an example. In Europe, the most dominant countries at the European trials, without question, are Finland and Poland. We're just talking stats here. This is an opinion, okay? When you look at the guys that have won the European trials the most, Finland and Poland, when they go to the World Championship, they get their fucking asses kicked. Okay, they do really bad against the Brazilians.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is accounting for this? Is it just there's less of them, overall training, so you get a lower quality of athlete, like the aggregate, right? Is it that they don't, jiu-jitsu was in Brazil for longer, so that's why. Well, I don't think that accounts for it. I'll try to explain why. I think ultimately the reason why is because when you look at the Polish guys, or I can't speak as much about the Finnish guys, to be honest, actually. I don't know if this is true in Finland, but I know definitely for the Polish guys, they're mostly just no-gi guys. And there's a certain mistake that can be made when you just do no-gi.
Yeah.
Which costs them at the highest level competitively. Okay, so what is it in the gi that is different from no-gi on a mechanical level, which fundamentally changes the behavior you're going to engage in as an athlete? I think that leg locks are way harder in the gi. I think they're way harder. You could, in my opinion, obviously we don't have a ton of data to corroborate this, but just my anecdotal circumstantial evidence or experience, I should say, is that if you allow heel hooks in the gi, they don't actually work that well. I've rolled a decent amount of times with heel hooks in the gi just because I was curious, experimenting. I used to teach at a school in New York, which was gi and no gi, and I taught gi classes. And I would roll in the gi with blue belts, and I would really struggle to get heel hooks on them because all of the things that you could do to stop a heel hook, with the exception of maybe heel slipping and toe slipping, are way easier. Crowding the guy, crushing them, gripping them. Man, good fucking luck trying to finish a 50-50 heel hook in the gi. Good fucking luck. It is so fucking hard. Now, you have increased friction with your legs. That's definitely true. But in my experience, it's just harder to finish. And then let's also add on top, even if we say, okay, heel hooks are maybe just as easy in both, or maybe they're even easier in the gi. I don't agree with that, but I could even give that point. It doesn't change the fact that no one is doing them in the gi because they're illegal in the IBJJF.
Exactly.
So because the Brazilian guys were not doing heel hooks as a major part of their game, because they were always doing the IBJJF, and they were always, that was they were doing ADCC, but they were also always doing IBJJF, right? They're also doing both at the same time. They had to engage in competitive behavior, which is going to lead to success in both areas, not just ADCC. If you're only doing ADCC, you go, I could just jump on leg locks, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could just go for heel hooks all the time. But if you're doing IBJJF and ADCC, you can't, because it's illegal in IBJJF. So what are you going to have to do? You got to figure out something different. So what are you going to do? In the gi, what's the optimal competitive strategy? Well, it's very clear. The optimal competitive strategy is as follows. What you want to do is you want to put the man down to his hips, and whether your hips are also on the mat or not, you want to then proceed to either pass his guard or take his back. Okay, that's it. That's the main thing you're doing.
And
you
Robert,
might
I
be
have to
doing
stop
this
you there and get some advantages while you're doing it. It's very crucial.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. I mean, ultimately, that won't hurt. And there's little games you can play there too. But if we're just talking about points, the actual point strategy, because advantages are kind of weird, but the actual points themselves that's how you're going to get it. You put the man down to his hips, and you chase the back or the pass, right?
Exactly. I'm with you.
Or maybe one and then the other. You're not going to, this is what you're not going to do. You're not going to stay on your back and try to fight for submissions, because you're not going to win if you do that. Not long term against good people. You're not going to fall back and do leg locks. You're going to put the guy down to his hips, and you're going to figure out, how do I get past his legs, or how do I take his back, right? That's the berimbolo, right? The berimbolo is a way you can take a guy's back without passing his legs, right?
Mm.
So think about it. We go back to 1994. From 1994 until, even today in Brazil, you have an active competitive circuit of guys who cannot rely on leg locks just to win. What they have to do is they have to figure out, how do I put a man down to his hips? How do I get around his legs? And how do I take his back? Now you can say, Rob, you can just do that in no gi. You don't need the gi to do that. You're right, you can. But here's the question. Will you? All right?
That's a big question.
Because you have this temptation always in front of you. It's, in a sense, it's the dark side. It's like Master Yoda talks about, right? It's there in front of you and it's seductive. You're like, oh, well, I shouldn't do that because it's a quicker path to power, but it's not a long-term one by itself, right? I love leg locks, of course, but I'm just arguing by themselves, it's not a long-term path to success. Even if you tell yourself that, it's so easy just to dive into them and primarily focus on that. When you're learning jiu-jitsu, okay, whenever you learn new skills, there's always resistance to human beings. Naturally, we don't want to do stuff that's like high risk. The longer a match goes on and the more things I have to do, the higher risk it is, no matter how good you are, right? Like there's always higher risk. So if you can take a guy out in 30 fucking seconds as quick as possible and you only have to do one thing, attack his legs, that's pretty low risk. And there's a temptation when you allow that to beginning students that they're just going to jump on that and they're just going to like move down that route and they're never going to learn positional jiu-jitsu. So ultimately my point is that the first part of my point is that the gi it's an educational tool, that what it does in connection with mechanical features, but also the IBJJF rules regarding leg locks, is that it encourages beginning students to focus first and foremost on an understanding of the positional game of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is centered around putting a man down to his hips and getting past his legs and or taking his back. If I told a beginning student, imagine you're a beginning student and you're like, man, Jiu-Jitsu is really scary. I'm about to go into a match. Everybody's watching me. My teammates are there. You know, my coach is there. I don't want to look bad. And I say, okay, you're not super confident in your game. So you're going to have to go out there and you're going to have to put him down to his hips. You're going to have to avoid submissions. You're going to have to get around his legs. You're going to have to hold him down. And then you're going to have to find a way to get to a submission. Or I say, just grab his legs from the bottom or the top, anywhere, right?
Grip and rip.
Yeah, right. Like it's so much easier just to do that. And it's not inherently bad, of course. Leg locks are great. But the problem is that becomes an all-consuming, like, training obsession, right? I mean, I am as guilty of that, or I should say at least I'm not now, but early in my jiu-jitsu career, man, was I ever guilty of this, like I was obsessed with them, because I didn't really have this perspective now because I hadn't really, thought about this that much, but like I saw leg locks as this is all I recognized was this. I want to win matches. These are legal moves. I can get them much easier than I can get anything else. This is the big advantage of leg locks. One of the big advantages is that they're so accessible. You can get them from bottom position. You can get them from top position. You can get them if they're kneeling. You can get them if they're standing because the guy's legs are always in front of you. It's so hard to get the guy's legs away from you. And you don't need to pass his guard to go for them. There's a great interview with 佗ᴄ years ago. I'm not trying to disparage 佗ᴄ. He's like a legend. I love him. But in this interview, they asked him, how did you get into leg locks? And this might have been a joke, I've heard, but he said it.
Sure.
Yeah, he said in the interview, I'm just not good at guard passing. So it's like, it's an interesting, if it's honest, it's a very, I think, telling, admission where he's like, yeah, I just suck at guard passing, and he never felt a need to get good at them because he could just fall back for leg locks, right? And I think that happens to a lot of people. I think that 100% happened to me. There was a period in my training where I remember this is at Renzo's. I spent like a couple months being like, I was just like deliberately trying to avoid guard passing. And I was like, what sorts of ways could I get to pins without passing the guard? And I was like thinking a lot about like stuff like that. And it's an idiotic thing to do because it's like, bro, it's like there's a simple solution to your problem. Just learn how to pass the guard, you fucking idiot. You know what I mean? But I wanted to avoid that risk. I just saw so much risk there. And I was like, fuck, man, if I can, I want to avoid that. And I was of the belief that I hear everybody talking about, which is that, or like a lot of no-gi guys, which is that, no-gi only guys are going to start dominating more and more. And the game is going to change. Well, it hasn't happened yet. So if you have a beginning student and you have these two temptations, even if you're a coach who's constantly like encouraging them, like, don't just do leg locks. Don't just do leg locks. This is like a meme nowadays.
It is,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah, where it's so easy to fall into this temptation. But what the gi does is it provides an educational tool by virtue of a competitive meta where the athlete wants to win. Athletes want to win. Students want to win. So if you tell them, hey man, just don't focus on leg locks all the time because it's not good for your long-term development. Yeah, cool, grandpa. You're in the past, bro. Heel hooks for life. It's not convincing, right? Nobody fucking cares. They're gonna tell you just suck at leg locks. Shut up, grandpa, right? Or if you say, hey man, heel hooks are illegal in this rule set, so you're gonna have to learn other things. I mean, you could still, nowadays, you're probably going to get people like, man, it's so dumb. They shouldn't be illegal. It's like, whether they should or they shouldn't, they are. Okay. And if you want to win in this rule set, guess what you have to do? You have to learn other things.
Play by the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. You're going to have to play by the rules and you're going to have to do what is within the rule set. And what is within the rule set, operating within that rule set will push you to obtain the positional skills that are required to perform in an optimal way in any points rule set. So let's bring it back to IBJJF and ADCC. Okay, these are different rule sets. Let's obviously be clear about that. But they're still both points rule sets, and they're not that different when it comes to like the actual scoring in certain senses, right? You still get points for back control. You still get points for passing the guard. You still get points for mount. You still get points for knee on belly. All this stuff is similar. ADCC is much more stringent with their criteria for scoring. Like it's way harder to score in ADCC. Actually, not always. With the back, it's easier to score because you could have a body triangle. But if you look at these two rule sets, there's a lot of similarities, at least in terms of the scoring criteria, right? The ADCC rules about the no points time period, there's no precedent for that in IBJJF, but the scoring criteria, very similar.
Very similar, right? And you'd say it's for the most part, it's the same. And then there's a couple of variations.
Yeah. And ultimately, at a high level, the points are going to decide who wins most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. Submissions, of course, occur sometimes, but let's be clear here. At the elite level, they're rarer and rarer. So, for instance, like just a recent example, I was watching the Emerald City Invitational, which is a pretty good sub-only event that just happened in, I think it happened in New Jersey. And there were a lot of like high level guys, and I don't think there were any submissions in regulation. Unless I'm mistaken, I can't remember any. And the eventual winner, Kieran Kichuk, he definitely didn't submit anybody in regulation. Again, maybe I'm forgetting, but I'm pretty sure he didn't. And the matches were pretty good, but it all pretty much went to EBI overtime. It's an EBI rules tournament, and that's what you're going to see in any competitive meta
penalty
and
shootout.
Any rule set is that ultimately, EBI overtime is like the equivalent of points, so to speak, right? Where it's like it's not getting decided by submission. It's mostly decided by points, and points are reflective in IBJJF and ADCC positional advancement. So the athletes who are most encouraged to acquire positional skills, both defensively and offensively, first and foremost, And they're encouraged to do this, not because of like personal, somebody saying stuff to you. I could tell this to a student and he will probably just not give a fuck and do what he wants. But they're encouraged to do it through a systemic method, which is a rule set that they want to win. They want to win these tournaments. That is going to encourage the optimal development of a student.
So it is more the rule set that you are required to compete under if you are wearing a gi than the actual fabric of the gi itself and the grips that might change if you're playing that you believe provides the ultimate benefit behind gi training. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the biggest benefit is that, but I do also think there is something to be said for the ease in which positional advancements or even a positional defensive game can be played in the gi. So I think you can also like view it as beneficial in that sense. So for instance, if I want to practice, just a really obvious example is ģerimbolos. If you want to do ģerimbolos and you first try to do it in no gi, what you're probably going to experience is a lot of failure and you're going to be like, this shit is literally a waste of time. You may persist, right? But a lot of people are just going to like experience failure and then just conclude it's a waste of time. Whereas in the gi, it's a lot easier to immediately start having modest success with it because the grips are so much easier. And then you get really good at it there. And then you come into no gi and you do it there. Now, like, I want to be clear. I think the argument that I don't think that you need to practice like this argument about like certain things being easier in the gi, right? People always talk about it as, oh, it's a slower game. So it's more technical. I don't think it has anything to do with speed. It's not like how fast or not the game is. I don't think it has anything to do with that. This part of my argument more so just has to do with like it's not the speed at which things happen. It's the ease at which we can get things done. So for instance, like if you want to learn how to do a leg drag, learning how to do a leg drag in the gi is so much fucking easier. It's not even comparable. You could look at leg drags happening in gi, elite gi black belt competition, which are like, bro, there's no way he would have got that in no gi. Just the grips he could make, which help him. But then you get really good at it there. You come to no gi. Guess what? You're still really good at it. And now you have the confidence to go after it, right? You might not get it as much, of course, because it's a little harder without all those grips, but you're still going to go for it. And you're going to get it a lot. You've gained this skill. It's like training wheels, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like the rule set is one thing to add that meta into people's training practices, but what you're saying then for the fabric of the gi itself and providing those grips is just giving those, the training wheels to then take off for no gi.
Yeah. But to be clear, I think that the rule set is the number one thing. Like, I think we could hypothetically completely do away with the gi as a thing. Like if somehow we could convince every no-gi tournament to adopt the IBJJF rules of no heel hooks until brown belt, I think we could probably get similar effects, but that's never going to happen. And I also personally wouldn't even want that because I think that it's good to have different rule sets to practice different things at every belt level, right? So I wouldn't really want that. But I think you could get a similar effect, right? The gi isn't like some magic thing, right? That if you wear your jiu-jitsu is going to be inherently better. It's more so like there's a small mechanical aspect of it, but the biggest aspect of it is sociological. The degree to which the competitive community in the gi is you're pushed to engage in certain behavior, which is going to yield long-term results that are good for you in gi or no gi points competition. That's the crucial point, that we're talking about points competition. If you're talking about sub-only no gi, I think that there is literally almost no benefit to it, to training in the gi, right? If your primary goal is to, win sub-only tournaments, I don't see how beneficial it is. But this is just a personal bias, I just literally don't care at all about sub-only. I am much more interested in points tournaments because for a lot of reasons, but yeah. So
what about for self-defense then, Robert? Come on, man.
Oh man. I think self-defense is why are you doing jiu-jitsu? Go buy a gun and learn how to run away from people. No, but I mean, it's like
you are in Texas now at the moment, so man, it's different. Talk about sociological conditions. That's a different story over there,
bro. Texas's gun laws are they're like kind of scary, actually. Like when you look up how easy it is to just fucking go buy a gun, there's no background checks.
So I hear.
Yeah, but anyway, so like, okay, so this is a useful analogy to describe. So I might have mentioned this on previous podcasts. There's an educational tool which I was really interested by when I was like pursuing philosophy back in the day. For those people that are listening that don't know, I was once pursuing philosophical like graduate work, which I'm no longer. I decided to do jiu-jitsu instead, for what it's worth.
Man, what are you doing?
But anyway, so like, okay, I still am really into Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein has this concept, which is known as a Wittgenstein's ladder, which is the idea that at early stages of a learner's or a young student's development in any field of skill acquisition, it is oftentimes useful to lie to them in the beginning about certain things because you don't want them to go down suboptimal routes of skill acquisition. So, for instance, the argument I've been making with the gi is that what you want to do early on is you want to get students to focus on positional advancement. You don't want them to focus on leg locks. You want them to focus on punching through the positional system of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as much as is possible. And then the reason for this is that these are skills that are really hard to obtain because they're inherently higher in risk because the matches are taking longer and you just have to do more things. You know, they're more complicated tasks. There's more steps to them, so more things can go wrong. So from that perspective, you're not encouraged to do it. And you don't understand why you should have to do that when you could just jump on his legs. But if you get early students, like the idea of a Wittgenstein's ladder is that you climb up the ladder, and then once you get to the top of the ladder, you can kick the ladder down. You don't need it anymore. If you take a guy like, Lachlan Giles. Lachlan Giles is a guy who, I don't know a ton about his training history, but he was a black belt. This I do know. He was a black belt before he ever got like really good at leg locks. And I have no doubt that his training up to that point was probably very position focused, right? He had a good understanding of passing, sweeps, back takes, guard retention, etc. And then obviously he's a very good leg locker too, right? And there are many other guys like that, right? Where being an elite leg locker is never going to hurt you unless you allow being an elite leg locker to keep you from developing other skills, which if it comes first, it very well might, even if you try to not let it, because it's just so easy to keep falling back into that. This is coming from fucking experience, bro. Like, yeah.
You still got to make room for your leg lock courses, Robert. Come on, man.
Well, yeah, no, bro. The thing is like, if anybody who's watched my instructionals, I say this all the time on my instructionals. So this is not like, I try to be a very like earnest person when it comes to like my views on leg locks and like the value of them. Leg locks are very valuable, but let's understand that if you view them as the end all be all, bro, you're falling short here. You are 100% falling short, but they're a very valuable part of the toolbox. But I think ultimately you want to view them within, we talked about this in the last podcast about like leg locks and MMA. You want to view them as part of the positional game. Like they are a part of the positional game if you, understand them as such, right? And that they're going to give you the opportunities. I use leg locks all the fucking time in training to make positional advancements. They're super well suited for doing that, right? Like you can threaten leg locks and then come on top. But if you're just obsessively focused with getting the leg lock, because you see that as your only route to victory, or you see it as the lowest risk route to victory, you will pursue that and you will ignore the other opportunities which are available to you. I want students early on, and I think it's good for them early on to focus on understanding that positional game. And then when they have a good understanding of that, when they feel confident that they can do that and that will lead to victory, even if in the short term, maybe they lose a little bit more, then you can throw leg locks in. Then you can teach them leg locks and you can say, now you can do this too. And look at that. This will lead back to the positional game. You know what I mean? And it's funny because now I'm an American, I'm a gringo, and I'm just saying what the Brazilians have been saying for fucking decades.
This is exactly what I was about to say, Robert. I was like, hang on. You realize you're advocating for a pretty traditional view of, gi jiu-jitsu and the leg lock game?
100%. And I think the ultimate argument I can make for this is like, who is winning ADCC in the modern day? Let's look at 2019. Tanquinho. Okay. Tanquinho. Obviously, he's a black belt world champion in the gi. So that guy probably trains in the gi. Okay. 77. JT Torres. Okay. JT Torres, never a world champion in the gi, but I think competed a lot in the gi and he came up in the gi, right? Definitely, I think more of a no-gi specialist. There's no denying that. His competitive career has been, I think, much more successful in no-gi, but that's only because he's like unbelievably successful in no-gi, right? I think he was still successful in the gi. 88 was Denise, right? I think it was Denise.
I'm going to defer to you. You're the man with this stuff.
Yeah. 88 was in fact Denise, right? That's a gi guy. 99, Gordon. Okay, Gordon is the exception. But I'll also add, Gordon does all the stuff that I was talking about that you should. Gordon is an interesting case where he started out as a really dangerous leg locker, but then added passing. And of course you can go that route. I'm not trying to imply you can't. So like what I'm sure a lot of people will say when they hear this podcast is they'll go, oh, Rob, but I'll just do leg locks in the beginning and then I'll add the passing and stuff. Yeah, of course you definitely can do that. That's been my path in jiu-jitsu. I started out as just like a leg lock guy and now I've been working towards, I want to be a very complete positional grappler. Of course. But, I've alluded to this obviously, where you actually just said it directly, which is that like leg locks it's very seductive. It pulls you away from that because you're like, it's so much easier and it's less risky, right? So it's very, very seductive. So even as much as you might think, well, I'm going to learn everything, but as long as you have this here, it's always a temptation. Now, Gordon's somebody he's done a very good job of not falling prey to that temptation. And he's obviously developed like extremely good passing. I remember the time when people first started talking about his passing. So this was just the first time I heard about it. So I was at a Grappling Industries tournament in Manhattan and Gordon competed in the absolute bracket. I was there that day and I was watching him and he was fucking guys up and with his passing. And people were talking, the people in the crowd was like, man, Gordon's passing is getting really good. And that was the first time I'd ever heard about his passing being good. Before that, I'd only ever heard about his heel hooks and his guard and his back takes and stuff, but never his passing. And that was clearly something that he deliberately had to focus on. And you can do that, but man, it's tough. And you oftentimes see people. Gordon had the advantage of having a coach who had a very obviously John has historical context and understanding that, bro, you've got to learn how to pass the fucking guard. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's important. So he had somebody there who, the stuff that I'm saying now, I don't think he worded it this way, but it's the same basic idea, which is that you can't just leg lock people. You need to have an understanding of the positional game. Okay. Period, point blank. And so he had that and it pushed him in that direction. And also I think Gordon really trusts John. So not all students trust their coaches that much, right?
Yeah.
If I, as a coach, tell a student, you need to work on passing and blah, 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 whatever, and they just want to work on leg locks.
They're going to work on leg locks.
What am I going to do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It is what it is. He's going to do what he wants,
So that's one thing that I think you've touched on then is it's more the the culture of either the place or the culture that's created by rule sets and wanting to win for competitions. And then that would translate to the culture of the club or the training environment itself that could all be changed or manipulated by different factors to then produce the outcomes that you're describing. And in this case, a more well-rounded jiu-jitsu game without falling for the easier options that give that short-term success, but maybe not the well-rounded game overall. I mean, there's so many factors at play there that could control it. To take it to that last bit for the club is the role of the coach to put in those, things that will define a culture. And I think what you touched on with alluding to the fact that you can tell someone to do things, but that's not necessarily going to mean that they do it, is a saying I like, which is culture eats policy for breakfast. Which is you could institute a policy somewhere but if the culture is already running against that policy, then it's probably not going to be taken up. It's people will just take the easier option, whatever's already seen as acceptable and keep running with that. So one of the solutions to that I think is important is the idea of constraints-based learning and making people do rounds of you got to pass guard, first points, get a takedown, get 2 points, pass guard. That's what we're doing for an hour and making that part of the culture. Do you think that kind of repetition of those drills, just focusing on those concepts, can help create or emulate the same effects of putting on the gi?
It can, but my issue with it is that ultimately I think that what can still happen is in your mind, you just think these are kind of like joke rounds. This isn't that serious. If you don't gain the goals in the round, you go, well, if I could have heel hooked him, it would have been different, right? So it's like, all right, you don't really try that hard, right? Like relative to what you could have. Whereas if your only option to win is to pass the guard and take the back. If you want to win, you're going to learn how to do it. But I definitely do think that constraints-based positional training 100% is super useful. But I think that it's interesting because ultimately, I think that gi training is that on like a very big scale, for positional jiu-jitsu. So let's talk a little bit more about like culture and like training environments, right? Okay, so like I think this accounts for why the Brazilians are so successful, which is that they care about the IBJJF. They care about winning in the IBJJF. Like you'll see like Kennedy Maciel is doing open IBJJF events. You know what I mean? Like they clearly give a shit about these events. Modern no-gi sub-only, whatever, WNO, ADCC, blah, blah, blah guys, like it's almost like I don't even know what they care about other than ADCC. And ADCC holds like 3 events, 2 trials for every region, and the World Championship. And then there's opens in Europe and sometimes in Asia and very rarely in North America, but they're not common. You know what I mean? That you can't consistently do those events, and nobody really takes the opens that seriously. I think they're cool, but they're not really held in the same esteem. Anyway, so like the Brazilians have this, and for anyone else who cares about the IBJJF, what you have is this tournament which is consistently running events, and it's consistently producing athletes which have an understanding of the positional game. Because if you want to win, even up until, in no-gi, you can't do heel hooks until brown belt. Like you will have to, if you want to win those tournaments, you'll have to have an understanding of the positional game, period, point blank. There's no getting around it. You will not win if you don't, even in no-gi at white, blue, and purple. So imagine you walk into a school, and in that school, your coach is like, we're going to compare 2 different potential schools you could walk into. In the first one, your coach is like, yeah, man, fuck the IBJJF. Fuck that bullshit. We're a no-gi school here. What we do EBI rules and ADCC. Okay, so ADCC is like once every fucking year. So it means you're mainly doing sub only. So you go and you're like, man, let's do lots of EBI rounds, which isn't bad in and of itself. But when your primary focus is no-gi sub only or whatever, you're going to produce a different set of skills than it would be if you, let's say, walked into a school. You walk into a school and Pedro da Silva Carvalho's there, and he's like, hey, buddy. He goes, we do IBJJF stuff here. and you're like, those are the tournaments you really do. What's going to happen there is you're going to be pushed to move in that direction of gaining point skills. I think this is an important point to make too, is that like, yeah, you definitely have to be balanced about this, because like you can't disregard, I think, even at the earliest stages. So something I do when I coach students is at white belt, I teach them basic heel hooks, and then I teach them heel hook defense. Like I think from day one, you should be learning leg lock defense, even heel hooks, but especially like ankle locks and toe holds, things that are going to be legal for them, right?
Yeah.
I think leg lock defense should be taught from day one. And a little bit of offense is okay, but I just don't want the focus placed on that. Because you're going to have to get through that. You're going to have to get through those attacks to get through to your positional offense. I think really effective ways of scoring, like for instance, 50-50 sweeps, make no sense if you don't have good leg lock defense. Like if you develop a guy who has a really good 50-50 sweeping game, but their leg lock defense is bad, it makes no sense. You're just going to get heel hooked. As soon as leg locks are legal, you're just going to get fucked up constantly. So you should be learning that, I think, early on, right? So anyway, you walk into that school with the Brazilian coach who's encouraging you to get, in that school environment, man, everyone's like shooting for IBJJF. They're like, fuck, man, this is what they're motivated to do. So like, my point is that telling students what to do doesn't really work. I mean, obviously it can, but like to the extent that we want it to encourage them to move in the right direction, right? It's like, have you ever heard of, in the US, there was this program called DARE?
The drugs and alcohol,
yes.
something or other. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was subjected to this program in like elementary school and middle school. And all it ever did was teach all the kids what the drugs were. We learned more about drugs. And like they abandoned this program because they realized that it led to an increase in drug use among kids. Because when you just tell young people, hey man, don't do this, it's not cool, people are like, oh, that's exactly what I want to do now. But if you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. I get exactly what you're saying. Yeah. That's shock tactics and that type of stuff. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
But then when you tell people the other options is harm minimization, where we can explain how the dangers and risks and how the safety and risks can be managed, that's often seen by people as, well, that's no good. Let's not do that, even though that it works a bit better.
But what's interesting is even that, I think, just can come off as like preaching from like out of touch old people, right? Like,
sure.
So it's like, hey, I tell like a new student, I say, hey man, I know you're heel hooking like a ton of people in competition. You just fucked up some dude who maybe he's a black belt and you're a blue belt and you're like, wow, man, this shit is magic. I totally get it. But you're going to want to work on your positional game. He's like, yeah, grandpa. Sure, buddy. All right.
You're probably right. Yeah.
And like, that's like, I sound like the guy coming to school being like, don't do drugs, man. Drugs aren't cool. Right? It's like, but like, when you have a school environment where the goal is to win IBJJF tournaments, now the student is encouraged because they're like, fuck, man, I want to look cool to my fellow students. I want to impress my coach, right? I want to get on that podium, right? Now it's not like the peer pressure from like a doting father figure coach. Rather, now it's, you have personal reasons for not doing it. You have a specific goal in mind, right? This is where the Brazilians historically, I think, have succeeded above everyone else. This emphasis on, because that has been so important to them, because pursuing that goal has been so important to them, you have entire generations of jiu-jitsu athletes who are focused on the optimal competitive behavior that you want in any points rule set.
So it's like having the competition is like that overarching goal. That's really what like, even the rule sets aside, just the goal to win those competitions being so important, then filters down, well, you got to learn that rule set, which then filters down into the clubs that are then teaching it. And it just so happens that rule set is still probably one of the better ones to master if you want to win some of these no-gi points-based competitions. Is that what you're...
Yeah, 100%.
Gotcha.
If you want to win points-based tournaments, you want to engage in basically the same strategy in gi or no-gi. It's going to, like, the same general strategy is going to, like, carry through. Like, just as a random example, look at Marcelo Garcia in the gi and in no-gi. He's doing the same stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same basic model. So Marcelo actually talks about what I've been describing in the X-Guard book. It's an awesome book. Anyone can get their hands on it.
I got it somewhere around here.
I think it's out of print now, which sucks, but yeah.
It goes for crazy amounts of money if you buy it from the wrong place online.
Fuck, man, I lost my copy of it, so I don't have one anymore. But I remember what he wrote, and to me, the most interesting part of the book was when he describes what he defines as a good guard, an effective guard. He defined an effective guard as one which allows him to go from the bottom position to the top position, and that is so emblematic of the point that I've been making, which is that he felt encouraged by the rule set to do that because that was leading to longer, more sustainable competitive success, right, over time. Anyway, so like that culture is like, I think very, very, it's like a useful educational tool in a sense for just winning points tournaments, generally speaking, or producing athletes who are going to win points tournaments, generally speaking. And let's compare this generation of sub-only guys, primarily in the US, but also in other countries like, I think the UK has a ton of sub-only guys now. They're really heavily moving in that direction. You know, Poland, I think, is another one where they have a lot of, I don't want to say sub-only, but it's very like submission-oriented. Or here's a great example, Japan. Japan is probably the country that for the longest time has had the highest focus on like submission-only style jiu-jitsu, right? Like you've had leg lockers in Japan for the longest time. Why aren't these guys just going out there and dominating ADCC? Why are they losing first round? It's because that stuff alone is not what you need to win ADCC or points tournaments, generally speaking. It's helpful, but if you take your average Japanese or Polish guy who's primarily focused on leg locks and then they go to ADCC, they're gonna get trashed by a Brazilian guy who's been spending that same amount of time focused on the positional game and operating within an environment which encourages him to do so. So there's a bunch of other guys. So this also goes into like the culture of a training environment, right? If you're in a room and everyone in that room, like let's say for instance, you want to practice your sweeps, and every time you go to practice you go to hit a sweep, the guy just falls back and tries to leg lock you. It's like, okay, like you're never working it because you're never getting that resistance of another guy trying to not let you do that to go back. This is why it's about systems rather than systems and culture rather than just individual stuff. Because like you could be a guy, let's say you're in a training environment, like I said, where they're super sub only oriented. It's going to be hard actually in a certain sense to gain that well-rounded skill set because you never face the right resistance.
It's like you could say it's possible, like it's certainly possible that an individual could place those own constraints on themselves, but to practice certain areas. But even then, they're going to be coming up against training partners with their own goals that may then inhibit their ability to practice those areas. And it's going to be a lot more difficult. Yeah. Possible, but much more difficult.
For sure, man. Yeah. And again, it always just comes back to this point about that's what the IBJJF has done for the Brazilian guys. It's given them this, it's obvious to your average Brazilian dude that winning IBJJF stuff matters, right? They're like, oh, of course. Like, that's what I want to win. Those are like meaningful tournaments. So it's like there's no questions asked about it. Like it's assumed. That culture really, really helps them, even in ADCC. Now, what's interesting, I will say, and this is where I think that this is something that I'm going to be very interested to see how it develops in maybe the next like 10, 15 years or so. I think there is a gap in the gi skill set, a big gap, which is really important in ADCC or just any no-gi points rule set, but especially ADCC, which is like wrestling. So, in the gi, it's more like judo, there are definitely similarities for sure. But I think that the takedown game is definitely I think it's probably the biggest difference in terms of like optimal behavior and optimal like skill development and stuff, right? How you're going to score a takedown in the gi is very, very different usually than how you're going to do it in no gi. I don't know. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass here, actually.
No,
Maybe.
I don't think so.
Okay.
And I was going to say, at the B team, you guys seem to be really pushing that wrestling focus. And the culture there really seems to be working wrestling, trying to stay on your feet, not conceding a takedown, not, immediately pulling guard. That seems to be from all the footage I'm watching, the culture in the training room there seems to be unique in that respect from a lot of places I've seen, in that it's heavily wrestling focused.
And what's interesting about that is another thing that confirms my point, which is that is only the case because of the desire to win under the ADCC rule set. And the thing is that that's a rarity for a school, because most schools are not going to be constructed around trying to win a tournament that happens once a year. It's just not going to happen. So the closest facsimile then would be the IBJJF rule set. That's the point that I've been getting at, that those tournaments are happening all the time, happening constantly. I wish ADCC held more events, but they just don't. And in the absence of ADCC events, you can go do Submission Bonanza 17, your local sub-only tournament, or you can do IBJJF stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or you could do like fucking Nagas if you want, right? That's cool too, yeah. I actually like Naga rules, but maybe that's a separate discussion for another day.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not familiar with them, all the differences there, but maybe that's a separate discussion then.
Yeah.
I do know there's belts and swords for that I see online. That's
Yeah, I've never gotten a sword. They won't give me one. But the last time I've heard some guys have gotten swords, like some like adults. The swords are for kids, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Let's give like actual, bro, they used to be like actual blades. Now they've dulled them apparently, but like years ago, they were literally giving children weapons. But like, yeah.
So one thing I want to touch on there is one thing I'm starting to see, or just suspect maybe, I don't know how to put it, is that the allure of no-gi grappling, especially with these professional shows, is that the prize money or, notoriety that people can gain from winning some of the Polaris or who's number one or something like that, it's more the prize money and perhaps notoriety to raise their own profile rather than the prestigious lineal championships of a regular sporting competition, that's leading then to it being, also incorporating the entertainment aspect, where it's like it's more about that prize fighting aspect, or dare I say pro wrestling aspect, where it's putting on a show, selling pay-per-views, winning to back it all up, and then cashing a check. And I'm starting to think if that is going to be also now an influence on no-gi game, similar to the same way that the IBJJF has been that solid influence on gi game, is there going to be a competing influence of pro grappling then?
Well, I think it's nothing but a negative influence, because it's not going to help people get better in the way that they would want to win the biggest no-gi tournaments are points based. I would argue like ADCC, and people can argue with me if they want, that's fine. And I would say IBJJF stuff's like Pans, no-gi Worlds, American Nationals, Euros, Brasileiros. I'd say these are like the next biggest no-gi events. And then you could argue, of course, things like I would say EBI, it would be up there as well. And that's kind of an outlier then where, your positional grappling borderline doesn't matter. Yeah, but when you throw in the sub-only / no-gi super fight world it's a hornet's nest when it comes to like understanding jiu-jitsu because there are so many different rule sets and there's so little like it's not predictable in the same way open tournaments are in the sense that like so if you're a developing athlete, stuff like entertainment, I don't know what that means. Like what does that mean? Because like what I'll enjoy watching.
Come on.
No, I mean, seriously, I'm not trying to be obtuse, like, because it's so vague. Like, what I might enjoy watching might be different than what someone else enjoys watching. Like, I don't know what that means. Like, okay, so I'll give you like actually a really good example of this.
Okay.
So recently, I was rewatching Paulo Miyao versus Gianni Grippo at Kasai. I think it was Kasai Pro 4. It was the finals of the featherweight tournament. And fuck, man, I was like, this is such a good fucking match. I rewatched it like a bunch of times. I'd seen it when it originally happened, but like, I don't know, I just like rewatched it and it was like, fuck, this is so good. So entertaining. And then I was like, I came to B team one morning for training. I was like, man, it's such a good fucking match. And they're like, yeah, it was a good match. I was like, bro, I'm telling you, go watch it on Flow. Fucking so good. And then they came back the next day. They're like, what was that shit? I'm like, what are you talking about? It was awesome. And these are guys that are really good. These are not like shitty, low-level guys. These are like guys that are really good. And they're like, that wasn't entertaining. And I'm like, you don't find 50-50 sweep fights entertaining? I guess they don't, right? But to me, I was like, fuck, it was so good. It was so good. It was like, and I'm not even trying to be like, like joke excited about this. Like,
you genuinely found it as entertaining.
Yeah,
it was
super
a genuine
good
reaction, and you shared it earnestly with your high-level training partners, and they came back saying, "What are you watching?"
Yeah, like this was a shit match, and I'm like, "No, dude, it was fucking sick." But then the thing is ultimately people are always going to find different things entertaining.
Yeah.
If you show me a match where a dude does a backflip, just hypothetically, right? Does a backflip and fucking the other dude does a cartwheel and they're like fucking, whatever. And then somebody gets a flying go-go plata. Like, will I be entertained by that? I mean, I guess like it's cool, whatever, but like that's not, I'm being serious when I say like, that's not really what I give a shit about. Like, I'm not going to watch that and be like, man, this is what I love about jiu-jitsu, right? Like,
fair play. It's like, come on, flying go-go plato. I'm in, but you're right. It's not, this isn't the meat potatoes that really keeps me in it. Yeah, for sure, man. So I was challenged by one of my teammates to describe like what I liked about the Paulo Gianni match, and the answer I gave he found very unsatisfying, but maybe you and other people will like it better. I said, I'm interested first and foremost in a pursuit of understanding what's possible. Like, I'm really curious about like what is possible and what is not possible. And when you watch two really high level guys going at it in a rule set that I personally care about, which is points jiu-jitsu. Kasai rules are a little bit different than like IBJJF or ADCC. They're actually most similar to Naga rules, interestingly enough. But anyway, so like it's a points rule set. So, and most points rule sets ultimately they're very similar to the IBJJF. But anyway, you get to see the limits of what's possible in this given situation. Between two of the best in the world at it. Two of the best 50-50 sweep guys. Paulo Miyao, Gianni Grippo. Going at it in a rule set, which is interesting to me. And you get to see the limit of what's possible there. Now, the sub-only super fight world, I think, for better or worse, it's not really about that. It's actually really interesting you bring up professional wrestling, because if you know the history of professional wrestling, this is kind of what the super fight world is starting to look like. That's
which
what
is
I'm
that
saying.
It started out, professional wrestling, those were legitimate athletic contests. They were catch wrestling matches. But then people started to get fucking bored. They're like, oh, well, the really good guys started to negate each other. And so then what happened was catch wrestling went into two directions. It went into modern amateur wrestling, okay, which is awesome, and I love, and I value, and I appreciate, and I respect, and which pretty much all jiu-jitsu guys tend to appreciate and respect. And then you have pro wrestling, which is a fucking joke, and nobody gives a shit about it. It's funny, like we laugh about it. Like pro wrestling can be entertaining, right? Like the charisma of like The Rock or something, right? I'm not that into it, but I think Ric Flair's I think he could be fun. So like there is some entertainment there, but bro, if you ask me personally, would I rather live in a world without amateur wrestling or professional wrestling? There's no fucking question, right? I'm sorry, guys. Like, get rid of the WWE. If I had to choose, right?
Sure. One or the other.
Yeah. Now,
one's got to go.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, so the conditions which led to that split, I think, are kind of similar to what's happening right now in jiu-jitsu, where you have ultimately professional wrestling became what it is. It became a spectacle because it became a fixed spectacle, I should say, because that was better for pure sort of like visceral popcorn entertainment. And, you know, super fight jiu-jitsu is, man, we're not that far off from that, right? When what we're aspiring to have our athletes do is not pursue the limits of what's possible. In a sport where winning is the only concern, you're going to see athletes operating within a given rule set to pursue the limits of what's possible. That's all they're going to do. They're not like an athlete in a points rule set who wants to win doesn't fucking care if he's entertaining you or not. Okay. So they're just going to do what they have to do to win. And what that produces in the long term is really fascinating stuff. Like you could watch elite level wrestling, and if you're into it, man, you can go really deep into it. But if you're not into it at all, it's the most boring shit ever. Whereas pro wrestling, it's a little bit more superficially entertaining to kind of like everybody. And I don't think that you're going to see the super fight world literally degenerate into fixed spectacles, because I do think having the facade of it being a legitimate sporting contest, we want it to be real. We live in a world right now where the UFC has made, you know, the UFC's whole tagline originally was as real as it gets, right? So we don't want to look at it and think of it as fake, right? So, and it's not. These are actual sports matches that are happening, right? The winner is not predetermined. But the thing is like, when you have stuff like as an example, like rule sets which do literally prioritize entertainment for the judging, I don't know what that, you know, like how do I go out there and think to myself, all right, so instead of passing this guy's guard, I'm just going to do backflips the whole time, right? Like, is that entertaining to you? I don't know.
The answer is yes. Shout out Kazushi Sakuraba, yeah, who never actually passed a guard with cartwheels, but damn, it was cool watching him try.
Right. Like, yeah. So I think ultimately, like, I have nothing against the super fight world. I mean, I'll do super fights, right?
Yeah.
I have nothing against it, broadly speaking. I push back against this idea, and I think we should push back against this idea that should be the norm to which our athletes aspire. That's like a fun little sideshow thingy, you know?
Yep.
The main thing should be, let's try to win tournaments. Let's try to get, like, we all came into jiu-jitsu and we all started pursuing it because we love jiu-jitsu. If you love jiu-jitsu, you should want to see how far it can go. And you can only do that in a competitive system which is organized, which is consistent, and which is based on merit. When you have the super fight world is just so clearly not that. It's not organized. It's not. There is obviously some degree of merit involved, of course, because the winner or loser, like, it's a real match, right? You have to win or lose, right?
Yes.
But then you do get wonky judging and stuff. But I don't know. Anyway, that's not really
get that in any judged event, I guess, as well. So
yeah, any combat sport with judging involved, you'll get that. But like, yeah. Anyway, so like, if you're a young athlete and you think to yourself, like, if I'm a young athlete and I think to myself, I want to be an IBJJF world champion, I want to be an ADCC world champion. The path to get there is very difficult, but I'll say this: it's clear cut, and it involves the development of certain skills over time, and that's it, and certain physical attributes over time. You got to be in shape and stuff because it's a sport. Whereas the super fight stuff, I don't know what your path is.
But it could be, and I wouldn't say again that as you said, I wouldn't ever be expecting the matches to be faked, but it could be your path to super fights or, pro grappling could be assisted by borrowing some of those entertainment factors that you see in professional wrestling that would help sell tickets. And that's just the bottom line.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that's what's going to get people in, is that entertainment factor, and it may not be the best jiu-jitsu.
For sure.
It's going to be the most, for everyone.
As a boring nerd, I don't find that entertaining. So entertainment it's too nebulous a concept
subjective,
in my view, to like hold as the standard to which athletes should aspire. Because you're going to get like overly analytical nerds like myself that are like, oh, I don't know. What do you guys find entertaining? Like, I'm not sure. And I'm just not interested in it. But, at the end of the day, of course, like people can do whatever they want. If they like that, by all means, go down that road. I just think if your goal, which everyone says this is their goal, to win ADCC. If you want to win ADCC, what you should be focused on is the positional game. And if you want to get good at the positional game, you have no better area to do it than to consistently compete in IBJJF tournaments, both gi and no gi. And you don't have to even take my word for it. Don't listen to Robert Degle. Go look at Wikipedia and see who's actually winning ADCC, who's actually medaling at ADCC. It's not going to be the guys that are sub only as their chief focus. It's the guys that are doing gi and no gi. And that hopefully I've made a good enough case as to why that's the case.
I most certainly think you have, Robert. And speaking of Robert Degle and things that can be borrowed from professional wrestling, obviously one of the big things in professional wrestling, or the entertainment factors, is that persona that people come out with. And part of that is the name that they have behind them, The Rock, Stone Cold, and that translates somewhat into fight names. And briefly last year, I think it was, you also had the fight name of Robert IBJJF Legal Degle. That was the fight name there for a while, as you were tearing up the no-gi competition circuit as they allowed heel hooks. And then you were, why don't you take us through what happened? Because when I got onto this call, I thought you'd be anti IBJJF, but we've spent the last hour singing their praises. So take us through what's happened and when are we going to see you back?
Right. Well,
on the IBJJF mats. It
is a sick irony that I am like the most pro IBJJF gringo in the world, and they did me dirty. So like I got my black belt 17 months after I got my brown belt. The IBJJF minimum for being a brown belt is 12 months. Oh, great. So what's the problem? Well, what happened was I'd only been a certified brown belt for 2 months, because like every sub only guy, I was like, oh, I'm only going to do it when they allow heel hooks. So I didn't do any IBJJF events. I did one IBJJF event at purple belt, and I got disqualified in 8 seconds for going for a knee bar. So after that, I was like sub only for life. I'm just doing no-gi, sub only stuff. Fuck this. So I didn't do IBJJF events again. But then when they allow heel hooks, I was like, oh, cool. All right, I'll do these tournaments. So I did 2 IBJJF events, and I just I'm not trying to talk shit, but I obviously ran through everybody with heel hooks. It was pretty easy. My longest match was 45 seconds. And these were not easy local events. I mean, one was the Atlanta Open, which isn't, I don't know how big that is, but the other one was the American Nationals. And I beat some good guys in that one. People who I consider solid competitors, other guys who train full time, despite them only being brown belts. And I was talking to Professor Brandon Bennett, who I've had a really long and good relationship with. And he said to me that I deserved a black belt. And I was, and he was like, who would you ideally want to get it from? And I said, bro, you. I don't want to get it from anybody but you. And, he always helped me out a ton, and I had a really good relationship with him. And so anyway, I drove down to Atlanta where he now lives. He's originally from New York. That's obviously where I knew him, but he moved to Atlanta after he retired from the NYPD, and he gave me my black belt. Little did either of us know that would keep me from IBJJF events at that point 10 months, because the certification had only, because I had done the IBJJF tournaments 2 months prior. I did one each month, and I won both so quick. People were like also accusing me of sandbagging. I do get that, because it was literally comical. Like, bro, I could have been, if I didn't get my black belt, I would have been like heel hooking every brown belt. You know what I mean? Like, it would have looked absurd, right? And I agree. I should have gotten a black belt and started competing at the black belt level. To be clear, like, it's possible I would have lost matches here and there, because there are other really good brown belts. Make no mistake. I'm just saying, like, this image of this dude who's just heel hooking people super, super quick, it's not a good look. You know what I mean? Like, it's like probably let this guy compete with the black belts at this point.
It is also funny that it's the part of what we've just discussed about the leg lock, and you were taking full advantage of that in the rule set there. You were just honed in.
So the hypocrisy is in full force today, but like
just selective optimization. You know, that's what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah. The thing is the reason why I was just like starching guys with heel hooks is because, like, so all that stuff I just said, there's an asterisk, which is you have to know how to defend heel hooks, right? Like,
sure.
Of all those guys I beat, I think there was only one that had really solid leg lock defense. He's another full-time grappler. He had good leg lock defense. I still got him, but I got him with like the leg trap saddle. It was a more like technically sophisticated sequence. A lot of the other guys, I would just like grip the heel and just rip it. Like, it wasn't that hard because they just didn't know how to hide the heel.
Yeah, and you did point out that even if you were going to do gi training, you should work your leg lock defense from white belt. You did caveat that, so it's all good.
I always start guys with that. I think it's super, super crucial. Anyway, so like, and so then I went to sign up I wanted to do some IBJJF events to qualify for No Gi Worlds, which was in like a couple months after I got my black belt, and I was informed that I would not be able to because I was not certified for lengthy enough time. And I was like, you guys gotta be fucking kidding me. It was fucking so stupid. And I was like, I'll even pay the amount of like the 10 months certification of what I would have had to have paid. Like, you know what I mean? It was like a hostage situation. I was like, whatever, please just take my money. Let me fucking compete. Like, and they told me to go fuck myself, more or less. And like, the thing is like, look, man, I could have had two responses to that. My first response could have been, fuck the IBJJF. This is what a lot of fucking people do. Fuck the IBJJF, blah, blah, blah. And of course I was like, bro, fucking, this is so stupid. But
sucked. I
love the organization. I'm not going to let the fact that they did me dirty in this specific situation. And I think that it is a dumb bureaucratic regulation. Yes. But bro, at the end of the day, I still positively view the organization very, very highly. So I've had so many people who have tried from like day one with this. I made some jokes on Instagram, right, about it. But ultimately, if you look at what I've said consistently, I've been very pro IBJJF. People have put out like news articles where they've painted me as anti-IBJJF. I'm like, yo, you gotta take this down because this is not accurate of how I actually feel about the situation. Like, I think it's a dumb bureaucratic regulation, but I still like the organization. You know what I mean? Like, I think the IBJJF is nothing but a net positive for jiu-jitsu. Their existence in jiu-jitsu, bro, borderline, if they didn't exist, I would almost not even be interested in competition anymore. For real. Yeah.
So when are you due to compete? Because now I'm worried this was part of the the campaign to get the reinstatement.
Oh, no. It's a foregone conclusion. So like, I will be able to compete in May. So in IBJJF events in May. So yeah, I have West Coast trials in 2 weeks. Then I'm going to Europe. I have a couple. I'm going to do some ADCC opens when I'm there. Just nice. Like I'm in Europe for seminars, but it's cool that these ADCC opens are happening around that time. It wasn't planned. Like I was going for seminars, but it was I just saw on the website. I was like, oh, cool. These tournaments are happening. They're so random. There's literally like 6 ADCC opens within the span of a month and a half when I'm going to be there in Europe. And I don't know. It worked out. So I'm going to do a few of those.
That sounds like it worked out. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never done one of those, so I have no idea what to expect. It could be like a big tournament. It could be like a smaller local thing. I literally have no idea. It's just an ADCC event, and I'm going to be in the area anyway, so why not? Mm-hmm. And then in May, I don't know when my first IBJJF event will be because I will be still in Europe for most of May. There is a tournament in Paris in May, the 14th and 15th, but I'm currently scheduled to teach seminars that day. I might discuss with those guys about moving the seminar because I would like to do that tournament, but I have to see. The seminars have to take priority because I like making a living.
Man, it's got to eat.
Yeah. But like I will definitely do an IBJJF, most likely latest, like end of June, probably end of June, I think latest is when I'll do one. And then the goal will be after trials, the major goal for me would be I want to do no-gi pans, which I'm hoping are like September, and then no-gi worlds, which probably like, I don't know, like maybe November, December, maybe. That's kind of how I'm thinking in my head for like scheduling is concerned. Like those are the next events I'm going to focus on. And like, yeah, man, from now on, my major competitive focus is going to be IBJJF events with special emphasis on I want to win Euros, I want to win Brasileiros, I want to win American Nationals, I want to win Pans, and I want to win Worlds. And then also ADCC.
Nice.
Okay, that's a given. But I will say this, like, if you ask me to pick one or the other, IBJJF or ADCC, I'm going to pick the one that holds more than one event every year. So I would go with IBJJF. It's, people will shit on the IBJJF. There are so many reasons to shit on them. I just don't care about any of these criticisms when you weigh them against the positive benefit we get of having a consistent tournament infrastructure, which the only thing that matters is showing up and winning. That's the only thing that matters. Showing up, going out there, performing. Hey, guess what? If you lose an IBJJF event, there's another one next weekend. You never have to wait, right? You can just you keep going out there, you keep showing up, you keep doing your best. That's all that I want. What I don't want is a world where you lose an event, next one's going to be in fucking a year, okay? Or if you want to compete before then, you've got to hope that people pick you to do super fight events. So it's like that's not a competitive landscape that interests me very much. Whereas one where you can consistently engage. And then, of course, even without the IBJJF, you have things like Nagas and grappling industries and new breeds. Like, bro, nobody takes those seriously. Like, those are like, at this point, like, I was actually going to do a new breed last weekend, and I decided against it because I'm like, dude, like, I feel like it's like I looked at the bracket, you have like purple belts and blue belts, and like, what does this look like? I'm a black belt. I signed up for this tournament. I starch a bunch of purple and blues. It's not like a great look. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's borderline embarrassing, I think. So it's like, I have won more grappling industries tournaments than anyone in human history. And my question is, should I be proud of that or ashamed of it? I don't know.
I mean, I'd say proud, but when you frame it like that, I guess
I'll take it. Right? Like, and I've gone against, like, it's funny because like you will get good opponents in grappling industries. Like, I had a grappling industries in Philadelphia where I went against two of them were, I think it was only two. I went against two like very good black belts, and I had like good fucking matches. Like, they were like really, really fun. Like, these would be matches you'd see at like an ADCC trials or a major IBJJF event, just happened to be at a grappling industries. And people will automatically kind of devalue it because of the circumstances. If you put that event on like a stage and call it submission, Palooza 35, it matters now. But if it happens at a grappling industries, it doesn't matter for some reason. So yeah, but anyway, so the point is that like with IBJJF, I really do get the chance to compete as much as I want, and I don't need to worry about anything other than just showing up, competing, and winning. I don't need to worry about things like entertainment, which like I said, half the time I don't know what that means. And I don't need to worry about things like, do the event organizers want me there? No, I'll pay my dues. Sorry, let me make one last point that's like pro IBJJF that I forgot to make.
Go for it.
Totally forgot about this. All right. The IBJJF is profit driven. Is that a bad thing?
Yes.
Nope, it's not. It's a good thing. Here's my hot take about why it's a good thing. You want the tournament infrastructure to be primarily driven by the desires of the athletes themselves. The IBJJF is a for-profit organization and their customers are their athletes. The super fight world is for profit, but their customers are the viewers. ADCC they're currently now turning a profit, but historically they never have. Historically, ADCC it's just something that like a really rich dude did because he thought it was cool, which is awesome. That's great.
That's pretty awesome.
No, it's sick, man. But like, that's not, I don't want to have to rely on that, right? I'd rather know that the organization is encouraged to operate in a way that is beneficial to the athletes. So when you have a system where what we do as athletes is Jiu-Jitsu is not a spectator sport. Okay. It's just not. There is no sport which is primarily grappling based, which is a viable spectator sport. Okay. It doesn't exist. Okay. You have like sport sambo, judo, amateur wrestling, jiu-jitsu. None of these things are like major spectator sports. Major spectator combat sports usually involve strikes because the common person understands that way more, right? Or turns into pro wrestling, which is not real. So actual grappling has never been and will never be a sellable product to the masses. It's just not going to happen unless there's a major cultural shift where like grappling is viewed as like a fine art, like tennis or something, right? Which I don't think is going to happen either. So then what that means is these sports can exist in one of two ways. Amateur wrestling exists because it's part of the Olympics. Okay. And so you have like countries fund the training of athletes. You have like a scholastic infrastructure in countries. Athletes will come up through schools, which are obviously funded by the government. And then you have like training centers, which are funded by the government. You have that in wrestling and judo. I'm not sure how it works in sambo really at all, but in wrestling and judo, that's how it works. Jiu-Jitsu, we don't have that. So what do? How are you going to fund these tournaments? Well, the athletes themselves pay for it. And what that does is it creates a merit-based tournament infrastructure where the only people that the IBJJF are answerable to ultimately are the athletes. And you can say, oh, they don't listen to the athletes. They don't listen to the athletes. Of course, to some extent, they're not going to listen to like an individual guy. But when people on the whole have fucking problems, they will respond to it. Like the addition of heel hooks to the brown and black belt divisions. Let's be clear, guys. This wasn't done because the IBJJF was just like, man, we see the growth in jiu-jitsu and we love it and we want it to blossom. No, it was a cynical business move, which I am all for, right? Like they saw, oh, we're going to lose a market share here. So we are going to allow heel hooks because this is what the people want now. That's exactly what you want. They're answerable to the customers, which is us, the competitors. It's like a democracy in a sense where like, we vote with our dollars. So like, that's why like, not only do I think that it's okay that they're for profit, I think it's better that they're for profit. And I hope they always stay for profit. And I hope that they always remain as cynical and money grubbing as they are, because what that means is that they will not ever behave in a way that will fuck over athletes, broadly speaking. Individually, they might, but broadly speaking, they're going to behave in ways that's beneficial to the athletes.
Okay, very interesting way to finish off there, Robert. I'll leave it at that because I think we could go deep down that rabbit hole even further. But I think, yeah, I'm in agreement. And there's also the flip side of the amateur sports, like even people going for the Olympics are forced to struggle to even make ends meet because those organizations, they don't have that. Maybe, the financial incentives there are not available to the athletes to then turn around to other customers and sell their coaching services and things like that. And so I think there's both sides to that one. I think it's been a good chat. You did take me by surprise, the pro IBJJF stance. I know there's got to be some Brazilian listening to this thinking, this is what I've been saying, guys. This is welcome home. I've been saying this. Come on.
Yeah. I think it's funny. Like, I think that like all the Nogi sub only guys are going to listen to this and be like, that fucking creoch.
But if people do want to get in touch with you, the Instagram has been putting out some great stuff lately.
Thanks,
just with the reels, the clips. I'm digging it. And you've got the website too for the instructionals. Where do people go to find that?
So the best place to just go would be my Instagram, because I have the link in my bio where you can go to like my YouTube channel where I have free like longer form content than what you'll find on Instagram. And then I have the link to my website where you can find my instructionals. So my Instagram is Robert Degle, Degle BJJ, and the link tree is in my link, so you can get to all the other places.
And that video quality on those Instagrams, man, I don't know what phone you got, but it's been looking crisp. I don't know what's going on.
It's just that I don't know. Everyone's been like, what is going on with these video qualities? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just an iPhone. Like I've been using the same phone the entire time I've been making reels. That's not true.
Something happened. Maybe there was an app update and you're the one I'm noticing it with, because it's just crisp.
Did you notice it with the videos I was doing at Sarah's when I was still in New York? Because it's the same phone.
I don't think so. I think it was the first one I noticed. It was at B-Team.
B-Team Magic.
So I don't know.
Maybe.
Well, thanks so much for the chat. I really appreciate it, and love to have another one in the future. Maybe dig even deeper on some of those things.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, man.
Thanks so much, Robert.
You have been listening to the Sonny Brown Breakdown. Until next time, you can visit sonnybrown.net to find out more ways to break it down.